Welcome to another episode of the Lookout Podcast. My guest today is Pat Shreffler. Is that right? Am I saying that right?
Yes.
Pat Shreffler. We just met you just a second ago here at the Wildland Firefighter Foundation Banquet in Kalispell, and you just told such a moving story, and I just wanted to have you on and to share that story with more folks and on my podcast. And I thank you so much for being on, Pat, and I'll give you the floor.
Okay. Well, you're welcome, sir. And I was the Wildland Firefighter Foundation. Really is a great thing, and it has really helped out the firefighting community during times of desperate need a lot.
Yeah.
And I lived through quite an era. I started, with the Forest Service back in, the late 60s. And so firefighters and firefighter fatalities at that time, especially for the seasonal firefighters, was considered to just be, oh, well, it happens. And it wasn't. There wasn't hardly any support, or there was none really,
Just job hazard, like.
Yeah, and like when I first went to work, and we were in the Kern River Canyon, and it was just like, oh, by the way, up here there was a fire called the dry fire, and the fire suddenly went down the hill, and two firefighters that were sent to get water, because for the rest of the crew they'd been out all day, and in those days, you had the old banjo gallon canteen on your back, so they gave them all the canteens and said, go down the hill and fill up at the spring. And the guy's telling us, and he goes, and then the fire suddenly reversed direction, and it ran downhill. Nobody knows why. And it ran downhill, and it burned up the two guys. And James Bastity was killed. And so he got burned severely. They took him out. And they were burned, there was two guys burned up bad, and they were telling us that, the guy was begging people to kill him. He felt he hurt so bad. And they flew him, I think they flew him to San Francisco, and he died, and unfortunately. And then it was like, oh, well, then there was nothing done for him. Like there's nothing there to signify it. His name's not even on the firefighter, and you have a really hard time finding it, and the guy, it was just like, oh well, and then there was like, it just happens, and that's the way it is.
Yeah, line of
and
duty.
I'm like, oh wow. And so it was early on, and then I got involved in a couple other fires where there's some really near misses, and then I ended up in the Romero fire in '71, and we were there, helicopter crew, and so in that fire there was. We were told that the winds had quit, and the fire's laying down, and the humidity and the marine layer was coming in, and the fire it was doing nothing.
Yeah.
And then it turned evening, and the winds returned at 40 miles an hour, and the temperature went like from the 60s to 90s in 12 minutes, and the humidity dropped to like 13% in 12 minutes.
Oh, man.
And the fire blew up, and it killed these four guys with the dozer guys that they had up on the line doing indirect line. Yeah. And they're told that it's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
And then, so they're flying up, and we're bringing those bodies out, and, and it was like, oh, well. So we went through that, and things went along, and I got involved in another couple of close calls, and I really decided, man, I got to start finding out more about this. I started researching fire behavior, and I just happened to be lucky and be stationed down on the Cleveland at that time near the Riverside Fire Lab.
Oh.
And so Clive Countryman worked there, and I started going and finding all his stuff, talking to him, and just dove into it. And by '74, I traveled around and went to other entrapment sites. I started getting real, curious about them and trying to find out, because I had these close calls and saw these people die when the overhead was saying it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
So in '74, I actually started teaching fire behavior, and I've done it ever since, and that's why I'm here in Montana. And so I've developed my own curriculum, and where I put in everything that has killed firefighters, because I've seen them die. Yeah. And then, and unfortunately, through my career, I was again on the Six Rivers National Forest, and I had an engine crew that got killed on a fire. And I wasn't on the fire at the time they got killed, but I showed up at the scene shortly later. And so the engine crew, we had 3 firefighters killed and 2 firefighters, the captain and another firefighter, seriously injured. And so when they got killed, it was like, wow, we got to do something for these guys. And it was like, well, there's nothing we can do. And it's like, well, it's up to the folks to get their bodies and it's like, well, I'm going, well, at least we need to go to their funerals and have guys there. We need to go there and be in, show our respect and our colors and it was like, well, no, we don't do that. We had to take annual leave. We had to take vacation, and they lived in Southern California, and 6 Rivers is on the Oregon border.
Yeah, it's north.
And it's a 12-hour trip, and to go down to and we had to take our own time, our own vehicles, and those people got no support. The injured firefighters got no real support other than just, they got their doctor bill paid for. And I was just destroyed by it at the time and pretty distraught. And so then, and Gail Tasumi was one of the firefighters. As it turns out, and the only place it's documented and is in NFPA, where they track firefighter fatalities and such, and they list her as the first female firefighter killed in the line of duty. Was Forest Service firefighter Gail Tasumi. And she was young. I think she was like 18, 19 years old. And again, for their deal, it was us and the family tried to set up, and we had a dinner at the Samoya Cookhouse. But again, there was no formal firefighter,
Like
memorial.
Memorial, yeah.
And so it was very disturbing. And, they were all dear friends besides working for me. We were very tight-knit. We lived in that station was very remote, so we did everything together. There was no other, so it was friends, And then one of them lived in New York. And so that one, and I just felt, and I still feel guilty about it. I mean, we just loaded a casket on a plane and it disappeared. And I don't even know what happened after that. And it was really rough times. Again, there was no support. It was just, hey, buckle up, get back to work. We're still in fire season. Yeah, we'll give you 3 days annual leave. And so, we rushed down there, take turns driving, got there, went to the service, turned around right after the service, and we're heading back. And
back to fight more fire.
Right.
Yeah.
And we had a real arson problem that year. We had over 300 arson fires, and they died on one. Which was real hard to explain to her parents, who were they were Japanese, and that people were out purposely setting fires, and their daughter died because people purposely set fires. Yeah. And it hit me really hard. And then the next year, to the day, my Kyle Petit was an FMO in Idaho, and him and I had worked together on the Fulton Hot Shots. And he called me up and he said, hey, I'm putting in for the FMO job there. And I had to do acting at the time. And I was overwhelmed. And I was like, oh, great, Kyle. It was so wonderful to have you coming. And I never saw him again because he said, I got to go to this little fire called the Ship Island Fire. And Kyle went to the Ship Island Fire and he died. And he died because he hung behind me on the lookout for his crew. And when they were in trouble, he stayed there because they couldn't see the safety zone, and he talked them in. And again, so I went through that. And again, and so until this foundation came around, there really wasn't an organized support. And, and that really helped the firefighters out, helped the other people that were impacted. The injured firefighters go through it. And since it came out, I continued. I actually been in the fire service 54 years. I'm still a firefighter as a volunteer where I live, but I worked for the Forest Service, and then I retired from them, and I went to Kern County Fire Department, and I put in another 20 with them.
Jeez.
And I was a training officer, and I was on incident management teams for 22 years. And during that time, I kept being at incidents where folks got seriously injured or killed. And so the change after the Wildland Firefighter Foundation came about, the change in what went on and how it got handled. And I think the political pressure also that they created made the agency change.
Yeah.
And it's so much better today. And so it's a wonderful organization. And
Absolutely, yeah. And to tack on that a little bit, Pat, I don't want to cut you off, but
right.
yeah, because like you said, the nothing before, right? I mean, it's almost like taking the human factor out of it, right? Like it's like, oh, that was just it's like a tool, right? Oh, you broke a chainsaw. Yeah, we'll get another one. We'll just keep cruising. And it's like, no, that was a human. That person had life. They had people that loved them. You know, their coworkers are devastated. So I mean, it's not there, and no culture have we ever handled a death like that. You know, there's always some kind of mourning process. You know, so like it's weird that didn't happen. But then, like you said, the Wildland Firefighter Foundation coming along, like thank God, helped that out so much because now like you see, you have the color guard in the Forest Service now, right? So they show up,
right?
And so it's an actual like memorial honoring that person's life and sacrifice.
Yes,
because it is a sacrifice, and to not honor it is a shame. You know.
Well. And for example, the official representative to Rick Montano's funeral was not even in uniform. You know, and they said, well, we'll send the body and we'll contact the closest forest and we'll have somebody from there show up. Mm-hmm. But they didn't know the family, didn't know anything about the person. They couldn't go talk to him like we did. Yeah. And they didn't even show up in uniform. And we And after we went down and made the special effort, and it was hard, the mother, Rick Montano's mother, sent me a letter and talking about how important it was for her to have somebody her son actually worked for, and she could talk to him about how he did, what kind of guy he was, what kind of firefighter he was. And she sent me that letter, and I still have it at home to this day.
It shows you how valuable and how important it is.
Yeah.
You know?
It's so important. And unfortunately we keep having, and like I said, these situations and what happened to firefighters, like what happened to James Bastity. And they said, suddenly the wind ran down slope. And that's the way it is. Well, I was on another fire and I was on a couple other fires where the wind suddenly ran down slope. You know, and everybody's like, hey, the wind blows up slope in the daytime is what they taught you, and blah, blah, blah.
At night it comes down,
Well, that's not true. And at night it always gets humid and wet. And no, there's exceptions, and they didn't. And so I dove into finding those, and they're all predictable. I found out later, and that's what I teach. And they're all the only fire entrapments that are, you know, that I look at and I go, man, that wasn't really predictable, is where people get engulfed by fire whirls. And that's happened, where a fire whirl, and I was on a fire where it happened, a Forest Service crew on another side of the fire, but where they're cutting direct attack line and a fire whirl forms on them. None of them died. They were burnt, but they didn't die. But another fire, you know, with in Los Angeles County, it did. It killed a crew when it formed on them. So those things can happen. Yeah. But those are two. And I've researched going clear back to 1871. And the problem we run into now, and it's huge, is that people are shortcutting fire behavior. They want to spend way more training on other stuff when, you know, it's like making a person a great leader that doesn't understand fire behavior gives him the ability to lead people to their death.
Yeah.
Like Yarnell.
Yeah.
Marsh is a great leader. And he makes a terrible mistake in fire behavior, and he leads his crew to their death. Yeah. And, you know, and I'm not saying anything negative.
No disrespect. It's just
no disrespect.
What it was.
Right. He was in a situation, it was tough, and he did a great job until he decided to go down the ridge to get their crew buggies. And of course, you know, McLean has found out with his research how he was actually told to go down there, you know.
Oh, no.
And yes, they got radio traffic caught on cell phone of ops and them talking to him. But when he dives off the mountain, and real quick, there was a thunderstorm.
Yeah.
And thunderstorms were going on, and the IMET had warned about thunderstorms.
Yep.
Well, thunderstorms can give you a sudden wind shift in any direction. when he leaves the mountain, the fire is going to Yarnell, and it's going one way, and he's going to go down the canyon to his crew buggies to go to Yarnell. And of course, that's what a hotshot's going to do.
Yeah.
They're going to leave where they can do nothing to somewhere they can do something.
Absolutely.
And they were requested to go there.
Yep.
Now, when they dive off the mountain, he loses sight of the fire. So, that's fire order 2.
Doesn't say firefighter
You
orders.
go back to the fire orders. Fire order 1 is know the weather. Well, the weather, there's thunderstorms. Thunderstorms can give you a downdraft at any minute, and a wind could blow any direction. Because thunderstorms, they have updrafts and downdrafts, and they move. So they suck, blow, and move. And so any minute you get a wind direction, anything. So when you make a tactic or a move, you got to ask yourself, could this handle a wind shift in any direction?
Yeah, I'm in a safe enough spot where I can survive it.
Right. And then if there could be a wind shift, could we escape it? Do I have an adequate escape route? Well, if you dive down that canyon, you cannot see the wind shift. He has no eyes on the fire. And it's easy at that point to go, we're not fighting fire. We're not fighting. We're just going this way. Fire's going that way. I'm going to go this way to our crew buggies. I've been working all day. It's hot. It's 109 degrees. So you're not as sharp as you were.
No.
I was involved in NWCG did some tests way back in the 70s. And they were doing IQ tests on us in fire camp. And to make it real simple, they found out when you're on a fire doing hotline, you get dumber by the minute.
I bet.
And you do. They would test you and go, man, you're like DUI category, right?
Yeah.
And especially after the couple of shifts where you're not getting good sleep. It's like...
Yeah, and what you care about and your own like self-preservation goes way down.
Right. Your self and your just ability to handle complex things, make fast... Firefighters, what makes a great firefighter is a guy that can look around instantly, analyze facts, make a decision, and that's also what I loved about firefighting. You never knew what you were going to go to.
Always
You
a
never
challenge.
knew what it was, and instantly you look at it, boom, 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 fix it,
Yep.
right?
Boom.
And but it takes pretty good mental capacity.
Yeah.
So he makes a mistake. He forgets. He doesn't think about thunderstorm can change the direction, and I wouldn't know it if I go in that draw.
Mm-hmm.
And they drop down there, and he goes down there. And I went there 2 days after it happened. Like I say, I research all these things.
Yeah.
And then you couldn't get in there, but I went around and I talked to people. And then later on, I went in there and snuck in.
Yeah.
And I walked it. And he actually, once he came out that canyon, saw that fire coming, he deployed at the best place possible. He made a hell of a good snap decision. If there was any, because there's a little slope reversal there. It's a little bit of a bench in the bottom of the canyon.
Oh.
And they went there. You could see the stobs. You could see where they cleared it, they fired it, and then deployed.
Oh, yeah.
So that part
And to me, like,
good.
Yeah,
but
I've got like, I'm not as much fire experience as you, but I've got about 16 years in where I was able to be a leader, and I was a smoke jumper when that happened, so I was like in a higher level firefighter position where I'm going to critically think about that fire, and like those are the things that you wonder, like where you deployed, the prep they did, the burning out because like Wag Dodd from
right. Wag Dodd,
yeah.
yes,
So,
and he they did, and they deployed, and they did it, but it was just too much fire intensity, and it wasn't going to work.
Yeah.
So he, and you can make those snap decision mistakes. And so fire behavior, you've got to get it to where people drill it into their heads, the clues that change is coming.
Yeah.
And it's just like I talk about the sudden downslope wind I mentioned too that killed James Bastity. And then later on, I was on Fulton Hotshots, and we had a sudden downslope wind and a timber fire that caused a crown fire. And we had ran down and dug in, and it was before shelters, and we just dug foxholes in a little meadow area, and it burned over us, but it was, we weren't sure we were going to make it. I mean, I wasn't.
Yeah,
I was really young.
Yeah.
And, but, and then later on, I'm on the Cleveland National Forest, and again, in the 3 p.m, the wind suddenly blows downhill, and that's when I started doing research. That was in 72. And
Yeah, because you're like, wait a minute, this isn't like how it's supposed to go.
But then I find out in fact, from James Bastity's entrapment in 59, there was a report written on it, and there's been several others.
Oh.
And every fire phenomena that I go through and find, there's a researcher did reports. It's just for some reason they don't want to add it to the curriculum because it'll make it longer. And there's a clue that it's going to happen, and that's that is caused by what's called a thermal low, where you have a hot inland valley sucks the east slope winds down slope because of the updraft of the thermal valley. And there's a bunch of signs, and it's actually easy to predict if someone teaches you.
Totally. Yeah, we learned during smoke jumper rookie training because you got to know about updrafts and downdrafts. Because
updrafts and downdrafts.
If you get a downdraft, it's going to pile you in.
Yeah,
it's going to really injure you. Yeah.
Yeah, and so that's that's the two things. One, the Firefighter Foundation, Wildland Firefighter Foundation it's a great thing, and it really helped, and it spurred the agencies to do more.
Yeah.
And then the next thing, to prevent them in the first place, though, as I've dedicated my life to that, I've become addicted to it almost. Yeah. My wife just I'm an old guy. I'm in my 70s, and I'm like, she goes, "When are you going to quit?" And I'm like, man, it's like, just if maybe I can keep another one of those mothers from burying their young kid,
Yeah.
And or the citizens from being entrapped. So many of the big fires where it runs down, like the Camp Fire where Paradise burned, that was predictable. That there should have been much less injuries, and other fires and then they come out and they go, well, it was never seen before fire behavior, unpredictable because of climate change, global warming.
Yeah.
That's the big excuse, when all of that's not true. It's totally untrue. We haven't had, in 1871, the Peshtigo fire burned 2 million acres in a week. It formed a pyro tornado that was F5, destroyed a town, killed a whole bunch of 1,500 people are killed, picks up a locomotive and throws it. So when was the last time we saw that?
Never heard of it.
And I go on and on. Right.
Yeah.
1910, I'm sure you heard of that one.
I know
but
that one, yeah.
3 million acres burned in 2 days. 3 million acres, 2 days. About a dozen towns are wiped out.
Yeah,
76, I think, Forest Service firefighters killed. They don't know how many civilians. And but 3 million acres burned in 2 days. All right.
Nuts.
And you go on. There was all kinds of other ones.
Yeah.
But every one of these fire behavior phenomena, I can take you to a fire, every one, and show you a worse one way back.
It's true.
And so,
well, that's great to hear, because they keep calling us the mega fire era, right now. And
they call it that, and it's not.
Yeah.
We're not having, they're bad, and the reason they're getting bad again is because the fuel buildup is equaling the fuel buildup that was existing in the turn of the century.
Which makes sense, because 1910, we've been not logging and not thinning and not letting fire burn since 1910.
When the Forest Service first started, when I worked for them in the 60s and 70s, we were logging like crazy, and the fire crews in the winter went out and did thinning.
Yeah.
We were thinning, we were logging, we used cattle grazing, keep the fuel load down. And that was, what Roosevelt and Pinchot envisioned, is that we can stop the fires, we'll substitute logging, provide lumber, we'll have the cattle graze, knock down the grass loading, provide, meat. The idea was every one of these things can benefit both the forest and the public and help pay to run an age. And really, the Forest Service was like a self-supporting thing.
Yeah.
They didn't give them money to cut trees. They sold the trees, right? It paid for itself.
Yeah.
And
a lot of times ranchers would lease the land or
they
get
do.
an agreement.
The ranchers have to pay. It's a grazing permit, it's called.
Yeah.
But they pay per head.
Yeah.
And and it keeps the fuel loading down. And that system, and we weren't having big fires after that got in place.
Yeah.
And we were keeping up pretty good. The control burn part, they were doing some, but we weren't doing enough. We didn't have enough, and really we didn't have enough fire science. It was a good thing we weren't.
Yeah.
But the logging and the burning we were doing and the grazing, we were keeping the fires down.
Yeah.
And then we got slammed with lawsuits in the 70s. The lumber industry went in the tank, and the mills shut down, and the forest fuel buildup went astronomical.
Oh, I was wondering.
And so then it's like bark beetles that kill the trees.
Yeah.
They've always existed. They're nothing new. They've been there forever. The pine has a defense. It's called running sap, encapsulate the bark beetle and kill it.
Spits it out, yep.
Well, it just smothers it.
Oh, smothered.
Okay?
Yeah.
And so they keep them thinned out that way. So, the bark beetle and the pines live on.
Oh,
well, if the pines are too closely spaced and the forest is too thick, what these radicals call old growth forest, that's all this mass thick, the trees are fighting for nutrition. They're fighting for water, which is, it's like you have a garden. You thin it out and it grows right.
Yeah.
The forests have to be thinned, and so to be healthy. And if a thin forest, the trees don't die of bark beetles because they have enough moisture and nutrition to fight them off.
Yeah,
and they coexist happily.
Yep.
But then you have overstocked forest and drought.
Yeah.
And drought cycles also. If you study tree rings, you find that we've had huge droughts through the history of, you look at the old sequoia tree rings and right?
Yeah.
There's nothing new about drought, right?
Yeah.
But the trees will survive it, the majority, and you don't have the big problem if the woods are thin,
Yeah.
And you look at pictures from the 1800s when they first invented cameras and they came out west. You won't find choked up forests like we do today in those pictures. I have books. Lincoln, who's the OES fire director here in Flathead County, he has, and there's, and the forests, and so they were thinned out originally with fire, but then people moved in and they all started dying and getting burned up in these big fires I told you about.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, we need to do something about it, but we also need to keep the forests managed, and they have a system. And the system, and we have the ability, right now it's really tough because the thick forest has a head start.
Yeah.
And it is really tough. We are going to have more big fires. And so hopefully people will learn fire behavior and we don't have more funerals for both the firefighter and the public.
Yeah.
You get 100 civilians die on a fire because they delayed evacuation. Again, wait and see what it does instead of predicting the fire behavior when all the clues were there.
Yeah.
And so that's what we need to have happen.
Absolutely, Pat. And man, I don't want to keep you any longer. I really appreciate it. I mean, this is educational, like hugely educational for me because, I've been in fire for quite a long time. It's been my main career. So like, most of the stuff that they're saying that was like myth pretty much or just wrong. It was like, and then you explain the other end of it. I was like, wow, all right. Yeah. Like, I mean, it makes sense, you look at around Butte from where I'm from, the lodgepole is so thick, it's dog hair thick. And that's where the pine beetle came through and they're like, oh, it's drought and all this other things. And then hear you explaining like, oh no, it's because like it's an untreated forest and it's just out of control. And like you said before, we started managing it with logging. I mean, it was bison, all these animals out there grazing, and then even Indians, Native Americans putting fire on the ground, so and
lightning.
And lightning, I was going to say, and not stopping the fire, like the Indians were not stopping the fire as far as I know.
And it didn't matter because there was nobody out there.
Exactly.
And some people go, well, we need to start doing that again. No, we don't, because there's people out here.
Yeah.
And that's why we started fighting fire, because we were killing thousands of people at a time.
Yeah.
I mean, literally.
Yeah.
And there's a whole bunch of million-acre fires. Yeah, I mean, there's a dozen of them or more, and there's probably more than that. But I got a whole list of them.
Oh,
and through the turn of the century.
Yeah.
And so, we can't have that.
No.
And so we need to manage it. We need to, hit them hard, keep them small when they're not in the right place at the right time. And when we can use the fire, use fire. What it takes to do it all correctly is management of the forest and great fire behavior training, where we teach people everything that's ever caused the fire to do something to change.
Yeah.
It's unexpected fire behavior that kills and get the fire gets away.
Yeah.
There's no reason for it.
No.
Better fire behavior training, focus on that, and there's no good having leaders that lead you to death,
No.
So,
like I said, it saves lives.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Pat, I think I'll end it there unless you got anything else you want to throw in there. Man, I really appreciate you taking
You're
the
welcome,
time.
sir.
I know you're away from like friends and family, so taking the minutes, amazing. And we'll do a follow up. You're a wealth of knowledge. I cherish having you on this, and I really look forward to tying with you again because I want to hear more. I mean, even just your history, talking before you came on. I mean, incredible for folks listening. Appreciate you listening, and I'm going to track Pat down again because man, like this was so educational for me, and then just your fire career in general is really worth a time on the podcast to share because it's amazing.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pat.